morning. Thank you all for coming to the Rumi Forum. We are very honored and privileged to have with us today Congressman Jim Moran, who was elected to the 10th term in the U.S. House of Representatives in November of 2008. He is a member of the Appropriations Committee, where he serves on the Defense, Interior, and Labor, Health, and Human Services subcommittees. He was recently elected by his colleagues to serve in a leadership role as a member of the House Democratic Steering and Policy Committee. The Steering Committee serves as a critical and influential function in the caucus by deciding which committee members will chair and serve in the House. And Congressman Moran, he co-chairs the Congressional Prevention Coalition, which is a bipartisan, bi-cameral caucus formed to raise awareness in Congress on disease prevention and health promotion to identify strategies that can lead to a healthier nation. He also created and leads the task force on sovereign wealth funds, a group study established where issues surrounding sovereign wealth funds and their potential to affect geopolitics and U.S. and international economies are dealt with. Representative Moran graduated from the University of Pittsburgh's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs with a master's degree in public administration in 1970 after receiving his BA in economics from the College of the Holy Cross in 1967. And we're very pleased and privileged to have him speak to us on matters concerning Turkey and the EU. So what we'll do is we'll take question and answer. We'll have a discussion, little workshop format after he gives a presentation. Congressman Moran.
Well, thank you very much. Good night, and it's nice to see you all, and I appreciate the little breakfast we had. Thank you, President Yitseva, and it was nice to be invited by Mr. Akmanara and Mr. Yater. Both of them I've seen in various political events, and they have they followed up by inviting me to participate in this. I would prefer to be somewhat selfish and hear from the people gathered who clearly know more about Turkey than I do, and so it's I don't want to underscore the irony of me talking about Turkey when you can tell me much more than I know. So that's what I would like to do. I'll give you my biases, what I believe to be the case, my positions vis-a-vis Turkey, but then I would like to hear from the audience. To begin with, I'm very much pleased that the Bush administration and the Obama administration have both had good working relationships with Turkey, and there is a consistency of policy. That has not been the case with many parts of the world. But in dealing with Turkey, I think it's fair to say that both the Bush and Obama administrations have had a policy of positive engagement and, in fact, of support of Turkey's extremely important position in geopolitics. And I support the Obama administration's reaching out, and in fact, that was reflected in the fact that one of the very first international speeches that President Obama gave was in Turkey, and that was not by accident. The United States believes that Turkey, for a number of reasons, one, obviously, geographic. Turkey has played a central role in geopolitics throughout civilization, and now is poised to continue to play a critical role in bridging the East and the West. The Western world is very much concerned over the radicalization of some elements of the Islamic community. And that extreme violence, of course, has mobilized the United States into a military conflict in Afghanistan as well as in Iraq. But that conflict does not lend itself to a military victory. It is a battle for hearts and minds. And Turkey needs to be of assistance to us in figuring out how to prevail in that conflict. Turkey's foundation as a secular nation, led by one of the truly great leaders of the 20th century, Kemal Ataturk, I think can form the foundation for the type of governance that will lead to a sustained period of peace and prosperity throughout the planet. So we need to look to Turkey for examples of how that governance can work, but not just us, those nations that have had trouble in developing a stable governing authority. Obviously Afghanistan, but also Iraq, the Sunni nations of the Middle East, as well as Persia. So I expect that Turkey will play an ever more prominent role in the future, and we will be benefited by a partnership. But it needs to be a true partnership, not the kind of, in quotes, privileged partnership that the European uses, refers to, which the German foreign minister said doesn't mean anything. I don't think it does what would be meaningful, and the reason why the United States has supported it is accession to the European Union. And that is still the policy of the United States, regardless of the fact that half of Turkey doesn't think it's a great idea anymore. And Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy have both derided the idea of Turkey's accession to the European Union. They happen to be wrong. If they're watching this, which is probably never going to be the case, but I would hope that they would communicate that this is a short-sighted policy on the part of France, Germany, and those in the European Union who have attempted to keep Turkey out of the European Union. And it is not just the economic benefits that can be achieved through accession. It is the key to a profound transformation of of our Eastern civilization with our Western civilization. Trade is the way we quantify that, but the qualitative benefits are far more important. And if we are going to avoid World War III, then Turkey is going to be a principal bridge between East and Western cultures. So we have a very definite stake in the accession of Turkey to the European Union. I know that the Greek community has been, I'll try to use a diplomatic phrase, but less than helpful. It's the Greek community continues to do everything it can to exclude Turkey, but the reality is that again, that's short-sighted, and and in the long run, the Kofi Annan's vision needs to prevail on the island of Cyprus, but also in terms of joint accession to the EU. There are a number of things that I could mention. I suspect most of them will come out in the course of questions and hopefully adequate answers. I don't worry about the questions you'll ask. I worry about the answers that I give. But one of the most encouraging developments has been the pipeline that Turkey has led in terms of bringing several parties together. This is a physical type of bridge because energy is what powers our economies and modernizes our societies. The Nabucco pipeline stretches from east to west. This is bringing Austria and Hungary together with Bulgaria and Romania and Turkey. Excuse me. It will enable the the gas from Azerbaijan, from the Caspian Sea, perhaps from Iraq, from other sources to get to Europe, so that Europe cannot be held hostage by Russia. Russia is clearly trying to extend its influence in almost a bullying way, as seen with the way in the way that they treated Ukraine when Ukraine tried to show some autonomy and negotiating proper compensation for energy supplies, as well as their relationship with Georgia, which led to a military conflict. So Europe finally gets it that it cannot be so dependent upon Russia for its energy supply, and so it has turned to Turkey. And in fact, the European Commission President Barroso made it clear that this is a powerful illustration of the strategic role that Turkey must play in its relationship with Europe. I'm perhaps paraphrasing that a bit, but it was a strong statement and an accurate one, and I think a reflection of the future interdependence that is bound to develop between Europe and both the Middle East and the Caucasus and in fact most of Asia. So at one point the center of the world was in Istanbul, Constantinople, if you will. I don't know that that's going to repeat itself, but the reality is that Turkey is central in our foreign policy objectives being achieved. And so for that reason, I'm glad to be here today. I also want to recognize Shai Tamari, who is my foreign policy person. He's sitting there next to my daughter. If you would like to follow up on any of our discussion, Shai is the person to contact. He's a brilliant guy, but most importantly, he's a good guy, which is what really matters most. So now, if I could, can I open it up to questions?
Sure. So I'd like to actually exercise the moderator prerogative and ask the first one, and then we'll go around with the microphone. I'm curious as to whether you believe the U.S. could play a more mediative role to break the loggerhead that currently exists between with the Sarkozy-Merkel inclination not to allow Turkey to come in and to impose various things on their chapters that we mentioned at a previous meeting. Could there be a commission or a mediated forum or something that the U.S. is more actively involved in to broker that?
Well, there could be a commission for anything. You know, that's what we do when we don't know how to resolve something, we set up a commission. You know, so I don't think that's such a great idea, frankly, but we can do it. If you think it's a good idea, we can suggest it.
What was in the works?
I'm not big on commissions unless they have very defined objectives and time schedules. The fact is that you've already got a commission looking at Turkish accession into the EU, and they have a time schedule and they have a structured framework. Unfortunately, only about 8 out of the 35 items of agreement have been reached, so it's a long ways off. And my concern is that Turkish citizens themselves are kind of turned off to the process. I think they figure that you know, if Germany and France and probably other European countries that are letting Germany and France take the lead don't want us, then why do we want them? And the Europeans, for the most part, are very much concerned that Turkey is such a large country, 99% Muslim, that it is going to change the complexion of what they know as Europe. Europe, even though they have unionized, if you will, into an EU with a common currency, it is not a common culture. You have to pretty much be born in France to be French, or born in Germany to be German, etc. That's not the case in the United States. So we find it easier to envision a more diverse, integrated culture than a lot of European countries who are still very much nationalist and have a lot more history behind them. We are a country of immigrants, on the other hand, and we feel blessed by that, but it's a different cultural perspective. The process right now is so vulnerable to words, let alone deeds, that it's barely hanging on by its fingertips, if you will. I think the United States, to pursue that analogy, needs to reach over and pull it up. I do think we need to take some initiative, but in fairness to the Obama administration, this has been a difficult 6 months. I mean, we're in the midst of a worldwide recession, really, that America has looked to lead in terms of the economic recovery that's necessary. We are trying to reform our healthcare system, where we pay twice as much as anybody else and are no healthier and don't live any longer. We're trying to resolve the energy situation that affects the whole rest of the world. The climate, the change that is occurring at too rapid a pace and will adversely affect everyone. So these are things that we also need to make a priority. Unfortunately, Turkey becoming part of the European Union is not a front burner issue, but I do think in terms of long-term objectives, it's a critically important one. And so I would hope that once all of the Obama administration appointees are put in place in the State Department, that it will gain accelerated momentum, and that would be a good thing.
Super. Okay, let's have some questions. Erman in the back there.
Thank you very much, Congressman Moran. It's an honor. I'm Erman Lida, and I work at the IMF down the road. My question was regarding the EU accession. One of the important preconditions, and really one of the also most important corollaries of the process until now, has been the demilitarization of Turkish politics. And on that subject, actually, the European Union has had a better approach than the United States, in the sense that they have said, well, now you have a democratically elected civilian government, which has a broad popular consensus behind that. So that's our only partner in Turkey as regards our relationships with Turkey. When it comes to the United States, that has not been the case. So be it Cold War legacy, be it the war in Iraq, which increases the strategic currency of Turkey and its military, but the United States has also kept, until now, a special relationship with the Turkish military. Isn't it time for that relationship, or isn't it time for the relationship between the United States and Turkey to be set and based on a strictly civilian basis, because it would really help the democratization and the demilitarization process that is ongoing right now in Turkey? Thank you.
Yes. I guess I should elaborate a little bit. During the Cheney-Bush administration, there was an emphasis on military hard power to the near exclusion of diplomatic soft power. It hasn't gotten us anywhere other than regression from our influence and reputation around the world. One of the reasons why that was the case is that our military is well organized, it's very well funded, it's the only thing that the Republicans and Democrats could agree upon, defense funding over 8 years. All of the domestic funding, for the most part, was delayed in what we call a continuing resolution. You couldn't get any money. The Defense Appropriations Bill would come up, it would take all the chips off the table, and whatever was left would go to domestic spending, including spending to the State Department. The State Department's influence was substantially diminished over those 8 years. Its leadership was weak, and so we saw diplomacy take a back seat to military power. And folks in the administration over the last 8 years, and it really began since the 1980s, with the short interlude during the from '76 to well, it started in the '80s, I guess. So it was the right thing to is the proper description, and so for almost 30 years, we have led with our military dominance. That's one thing that Turkey could agree upon, that to give financial and hardware support to Turkey's military. I've visited the military complex a number of times, and clearly it's far more ostentatious and imposing than Turkey's governmental campus, if you will. I wasn't terribly impressed by the judgment of some of the military generals, I'll have to tell you. I will never forget, just before the Iraq War, I was asking, well, if the United States was to go in and prevail, who should administer Iraq, or particularly Baghdad? And the consensus of all of the Turkish generals was the Turkmens, which I saw as a somewhat narrow-minded perspective, since the Turkmens are a very, very small part of the population. But clearly, you know, it was like that New Yorker cartoon where New Yorkers see New York City as the center of the world and occupying 90% of its influence. I felt that their judgment was insular, and I'm glad to see that their influence has been somewhat diminished. But you're quite right that that the United States has propped up Turkey's military government, but I think that's changing. I know it is. This administration is going to put far greater emphasis and resources into diplomacy and economic development in countries that where it's needed. I do think that's what Turkey needs to do as well. Turkey has a very good policy of avoiding conflict with its neighbors, finding ways to work with all of its neighbors, including Syria, Iraq, Iran to some extent, lesser extent, but to some extent. Not just the natural ones, Azerbaijan and the like, but reaching out. Now, obviously, the conflict with Armenia is still unresolved, and Nagorno-Karabakh needs to be resolved, and but Turkey is clearly the dominant power there. Armenia is a landlocked nation and a dysfunctional government. And if they're listening to this, they should know that despite what many of my Armenian friends in the United States will say, it is a dysfunctional government, folks, and needs to be changed. It's going to change. What you have described is what was the case for the last maybe 20 years. It's changing. You need to help us change it. You're with the IMF. That's one of the ways we can change it.
Any others? In the back there.
Probably should have stuck to the one-word answer. We could have would have been a much more efficient Q&A session.
My name is Mehmet. I'm an intern here at Rumi Forum. You said that there was a committee helping Turkey and its European Union admission. What exactly is the committee doing to help the admission
I'm just
process?
talking about the commission itself. There are people appointed to reviewing all of the protocol, if you will. Setting up a new commission. I mean, it sounds like a nice idea, but who's going to staff it other than the people who are already involved in the issue? The real problem is much greater than what a commission can come up with. I don't know what a commission would do. You have to somehow get the support of the Turkic people, first of all, for being part of the European Union, put aside their hurt feelings, and move forward more aggressively. That takes leadership. It's going to have to be Prime Minister Erdogan to achieve that. And in terms of Europe, Sarkozy, Merkel, and other leaders are going to have to talk to their constituencies and say, this is a good thing. This is what we need. And they need to refer to the Nabucco pipeline as an example of why Turkey needs to be part of Europe and not torn between the East and West. Turkey can bring as much economic prosperity to Europe as Europe can provide to Turkey, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
Yeah, how you doing?
Thank you, sir. How are you? My name is Hakkı Öcal. I am with the Voice of America.
Yeah.
As you are aware of the fact that some so-called conservative authors, analysts are playing to the fears of European countries that Islam is a threat to their social fabric. Here in the United States, we have this wonderful idea of melting pot. Apparently they don't, and you are very much aware of the fact of their national definitions of their national identity. Could you please address this Islam and its impact or its contribution to the United States, so that is it a fearful thing to have? Is it something good, something bad? So that if Europeans are listening to you right now, they might get some ideas.
Well, it's a mixed bag. You know, during the Middle Ages, Christianity was a threat to the social fabric of Europe. I think that what needs to be emphasized is that the state, the governing authority, needs to be independent of the religious elements within the community that they govern. There is a place for religion, theology. There is a place for politics, for government, and one of the benefits of the United States, although we continue to struggle with it, is that we have a founding document that insists upon secularization. Turkey shares that, largely because of the leadership of Ataturk and those around him at the time, but it was really his vision, which has proven to be insightful and farsighted. The Islamic community in the United States, as far as I'm concerned, and I have a large Islamic community, and I work very closely with them, but they need to play a more critical role than they are playing. I want them to be more involved in the political leadership of the country, and I know they have the capability of doing that. The Islamic religion is not a threat. In fact, it can be a very, very positive element of people's life perspective. And I think the Quran should be taught alongside the Bible in theology, not religion classes, but in the study of theology. But unfortunately, as happens in virtually every religion, maybe some few exceptions, maybe the Baha'i, maybe some Buddhist to some extent, but almost every religion is taken over by people who purport to be God's interpreters, and as a result, the original intent of whether the intent be divine or those who started the religion with their wisdom. Muhammad, for example, could not recognize the religion today. You've opened up a subject that I feel very intensely about. Muhammad was very enlightened, particularly with regard to the role of women in society and the economy. He was dependent upon the wealth of his wife, who supported him and enabled him to become the great leader that he became. He would not recognize what has happened to women in Islamic society today, and except when in what I consider to be largely self-defense, he resorted to violence. His religion was a nonviolent religion, and the law of Sharia, while it was intended to be just and relatively immediate, was not harsh, and was empathetic of other people. People like the Taliban, who pervert Islam, are just the opposite of what Muhammad wanted to see expressed through his view of man's relationship with God. And by saying that, I am disappointed that more Islamic leaders have not stood up and said that the way that that individual human rights are grossly abused and people are exploited and manipulated throughout the world under the name of Islam is a blasphemy to God, and I hope that will come. There are leaders throughout the world who could lead a reformation within Islam, but the fact is, when you talk to them, you realize that maybe it's not necessary. what is necessary is to marginalize the extremist elements who have no place in Islam. I don't know how many of you read the Kite Runner. Yeah, I mean, it obviously he has a point of view, but much of it is far too accurate, and it portrays the Taliban for what they are: hypocritical thugs who are really using their leadership for evil purposes and exploiting young people who tend to be uneducated and looking for a simple solution to life's problems. And in an environment where you have corrupt government, ineffective governance, and a judicial system that is unfair and unpredictable, you have the seeds of what the Taliban has been able to achieve, and what other extremist groups, including in Iraq, were able to achieve. Although Iraq is a very different case in point. That was a horrible mistake on the part of the United States to intervene in the way that we did for the reasons that we did. I think intervention vis-a-vis Saddam Hussein could have been justified, but not for the false reasons that that were given. But it will remain to be seen whether the government in Iraq is sustainable. And one of the very interesting things is that Iraq, again, is something of a bridge between the Shia and Sunni communities. If it's going to have a sustainable government, it's going to have to figure out how both communities work together. It's the one nation in the world where that conflict is probably going to be most apparent, and where reconciliation is the most critical to sustainability of that government. But once the Shia and the Sunni communities can figure out how to get along, and we can see more Islamic nations develop with the underlying philosophy of Turkey, of secularization and moderation and economic and social progress. I think you will see the kind of world that most Muslim Americans hope to see, because that's why they came to the United States. Yep.
I want to just say that unlike a lot of the late converts to be enlightened about the follies of Iraq, Congressman Moran was against the invasion in Iraq from the very beginning and voted against the House resolution. So he's one of the true prophets of the doom and gloom there. Anybody else? Question? How about in the back right there? Yeah.
I was glad to see, incidentally, that 80% of the Turkish people would not allow the United States to use Turkey as a staging point to pursue the war in Iraq. They were right. Our government was wrong at the time. Yes, sir.
Hello, sir. I'm from Pennsylvania. My name is Hassan, and I'm currently an intern at the House of Representatives.
With who?
I would not like to be affiliated with a party. It was
well,
Charlie Dent.
Huh?
His name was Charlie Dent.
Yeah.
My question was involved with you mentioned the role United States plays against the extremism that is existent in some of the countries throughout the Middle East, and this was also mentioned by President Obama on his recent visit to Turkey to the Turkish President Abdullah Gül, when he wanted to increase the numbers of Turkish troops that were in Afghanistan. And at that time, Abdullah Gül mentioned the Turkish schools that were existent in Afghanistan and also that are active in Iraq. And I wanted to ask, what kind of actions does the United States take against this ideology that has its roots in ignorance, and what are its conclusions with this?
Well, what we should be doing is what Turkey is doing. Turkey's schools are an alternative to the madrasas, and thus a good thing. I think we should be taking a much larger portion of the money that we spend in Afghanistan today, and Pakistan for that matter. We've spent $12 billion in Pakistan, and all we have to show for it is 480,000 Pakistani troops on the border with India, and 1 brigade on the border in the northwest where we need them to be. So we just passed legislation that makes aid to Pakistan highly contingent upon investment in education and economic development, physical infrastructure and the like to enable Pakistan's government to stabilize and strengthen. Pakistan is critical to the future of Afghanistan, and I believe the same thing needs to be true for Afghanistan. Our military should be there simply to provide protection for those who are exercising the smart power concept of investment in education and economic development, in alternative means of employment to the poppy, which is by far the principal source of revenue to that country. We need to give other people a way to provide for their families. And we also need to help them develop a predictable and just judicial system, an educational system that will enable them to acquire the kind of skilled industries that will give Afghanistan's a sustainable revenue source. So a lot needs to be done. Basically, it's nation building, and that's what we are going about now. Unfortunately, it has to be done through the military because they're the only ones who have their act together, frankly. But eventually it will be done through a greater reliance upon the State Department. I guess I'll leave it there. There were some other things you mentioned, but I'll let it go until the next question.
Jenna.
Yeah.
To
Jenna?
veer off the...
Yeah.
Yes, hello.
Yeah. Hi.
Introduce
again.
where you're from.
Oh, Rumi Forum. Yes. I'm going to veer off the topic a little bit and talk about Obama's speech to the Muslim world. What have you seen or heard from your constituents, non-Muslim, about this speech and about President Obama's mission to reconcile, the differences and the things that went wrong with the Muslim world and the Muslim population, domestically and internationally?
I've heard almost all good things. The only criticism that I've heard is from some of my Jewish colleagues who have seen a fairly strong adverse reaction to President Obama suggesting that the Holocaust was intrinsic to the founding of Israel. They feel that it's very important to make the distinction that that is not the justification for the existence of a Jewish state. That's a nuance that I wasn't aware of, and it seems to me to some extent it's a nuance without a whole lot of difference, because the reality is the Western world would not have established Israel had it not been for the Holocaust, which underscored the need for Jewish people to have a place to go that would be, where they would be safe and secure and free to practice their religion. Now, what the Israeli government is doing, I think, is a different matter entirely. And I will also mention I am pleased to see the kind of support that Turkey has given for a long-term, sustainable, just peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and an end to the illegal settlement expansion. But in going back to the speech, it's been very positively received. Now, let me make one other point, and it references the previous question as well. The United States has some major culpability in the violent extremism of Muslim populations. During the Cold War, we funded and encouraged Muslim extremism. And Afghanistan is a particular case in point, because we felt that if we encourage people's religious orientation, then they are far more likely to fight Soviet atheistic communism. So it was in our expedient advantage at the time to encourage religious extremism and to, in fact, arm it in Afghanistan, to some extent in Pakistan, to a substantial extent, actually, in Iran. You have to go way back in the history, but we continued to look for sources of weakness in Soviet influence. And one of the, excuse me, one of the areas where we saw the greatest ability to undermine Soviet influence was when encouraging religious communities. That was the case in Eastern Europe, Poland, Czechoslovakia, the Catholic countries certainly. It was even the case in Vietnam to some extent, because the Buddhists were opposed to Chinese communism. So we have some culpability, most of all in Afghanistan. We trained, we armed, we paid, we encouraged that form of religious extremism. And now the tiger has got us by the tail. So I think we need to recognize that in considering how much of a commitment is appropriate in that part of Asia.
Any other questions?
If I exhausted, I'd probably let you
Right there,
let you all
this is the last question.
All right, last question. Well, it's nice that it's a woman asking it.
Lydia Borland. Oh, Lydia Borland, Caspian Group. Thank you very much for your statements. I wanted to ask, what do you think Turkey's image on the Hill is currently? Whether or not you've seen that change, what do you think contributed to the change, and what the community should be doing or is doing correctly? I know when the Turkey caucus was first formed, the hope was that it would get 25 members, and thank you very much, you're on the caucus, and now it has 88 members, so that's the question.
Yeah, I don't know that that means anything.
Oh, the caucus membership? Yeah. But the question is about Turkey's image on the Hill.
I know, I heard the question. Okay. You don't read much about Turkey. That's largely a good thing, because the media, how many people are from the media here? Nobody's from the media. All this note-taking, well, the Voice of America, but you know, that's I consider you a little step above most media. Because the media is only going to write about problems, where people mess up, where things are going badly. If there's conflict, and the more violent the conflict, the more likely it is to get written up about. You don't read much about Turkey. In fact, the pipeline was hardly covered by any of the newspapers. Fortunately, the Post caught it enough to write a small editorial today, but that's big news. I mean, 2,000 miles, a $10 billion pipeline, it's maybe 10%, but that's a major affront to Russia's long-term plans. And it wasn't going to happen, but that Russia acted in such a way that made it clear that Europe needed to make it happen. It's a good thing that we don't read much about Turkey. because Turkey needs to strengthen internally. I think it is doing that. The best that we can do is to encourage Turkey's long-term prosperity, because economic prosperity leads to government stability. Now, unfortunately, Turkey is suffering like every other nation is through the worldwide recession, but it needs to hang together. Turkey needs to trade more. And that's why the EU membership is so important. Even whether it happens or not, it's something we should be pushing. The customs union is insufficient. Now, in terms of what the Congress itself thinks about Turkey, I think it's viewed as a moderate country. It's helpful that Turkey has very good relations with Israel, because in some ways America's foreign policy has been somewhat Israeli-centric. And as long as Turkey has a good relationship with Israel, it helps Turkey's role in terms of American foreign policy. I don't think most members focus much on Turkey. Unfortunately, the conflict with Armenia's interpretation of past history probably gains as much attention as any of the far more substantive issues that will determine the future, because that's politics. You know, the reality is that that most politics is domestic, even foreign policy. When Roosevelt was on the ship in Yalta with Stalin, he turned to Stalin at one point and he said, "Now I need to discuss with you a domestic political matter." And Stalin said, "Oh, what's that?" And he said, "Poland." Now, unfortunately, Roosevelt didn't do the right thing there, but he understood, you know, that most of our foreign policy is domestically oriented and largely driven by the ethnic communities within our country. That's why I said earlier that the Islamic community in the United States needs to be far more aggressive, far more visible, far more involved, running people. We've had some candidates. They haven't been particularly successful, but they need to keep at it. And with all the people that go to mosques, the encouragement of political activism, wholly in keeping with America's priorities of a secular a government that is fully representative of its people, should be the principal agenda on the part of the American Islamic community. And I do get frustrated. You know, you go to a coffee shop, a Middle Eastern coffee shop, and everybody's sitting around smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee, and complaining. That doesn't get them anywhere, because they're preaching to the choir. You know, everybody agrees. They need to go, you know, to Starbucks and to gently but confidently talk about how we can make this a better world. And I think the Islamic community in the United States is critical to that. And to the extent the Islamic community in the United States becomes far more active, then caucuses like the Turkish caucus will respond accordingly.
Well, thank you very much. It's delightful and informative, Congressman Moran.